Evolutionary.org Hardcore episode 228 is coming your way. Today we're going to talk about learning about test flu and how to combat it by Beligas. So this one is going to be a really good one. We got a lot of people asking about test flu. We're going to learn about
Yeah.
it. We're going to talk about what it is and are people confusing it. We're going to talk about the best
Yes.
testosterone options from Beligas, how to run testosterone effectively solo, and how to stack testosterone for your goals. First, remember we are on Apple, we are on Spotify. Smash the like button, subscribe on all the platforms. We would really love to see you support the podcast. This is a community podcast and it belongs to everybody. It doesn't belong to me, doesn't belong to Mobster, doesn't belong to anybody else. It belongs to all of us. It is a community project and we are all part of it. That's why we're interviewing people off the Evolutionary family. So come join the Evolutionary family and you too will have the opportunity at some point to come on and come on the podcast if you would like. So let's start,
Yeah.
Mobster. Listen, this is a topic that you saw, and it's been
Yes.
asked about a lot. And
Yeah.
basically, it's a topic that we haven't covered very much of, but I think it's a very important one. So why don't we start? I'll let you have the floor. What is test flu, and are people confusing it? And give us your thoughts on this.
Yeah. So I suspect, and there's an article that we're going to reference here that's on one of our sister forums that talks about the reality and especially what might actually cause a form of test like flu. There are, and I'll quote a line here, many factors to examine. So one of the things that sometimes happens, which we have addressed on other shows, we've talked about how some people have a literal anxiety-like response to giving themselves an injection. That's kind of obvious, and it literally is just people scared, the association with injections, the whole sort of recreational drug use, and without even beginning to name those particular products on the show that people use, and dirty needles, and the whole sort of anxiety of going to hospitals and getting an injection, and even fairly obviously, Steve, people absolutely freaking the fuck out a few years ago with the COVID inoculations and stuff, and the anxiety and the stress and the mental health stuff went through the absolute fucking roof over what was very easy, really not that big of an issue. But obviously, there was lots of things going on, and just the thought process involved with that was freaking people out. So that's number one. Number two, and again, is it the injection itself? Is it the physical process of giving yourself an injection, or is it the medication that's freaking people out? So they could confuse that. And we've seen many times, not recently, funny enough, but many times, I've just given myself an injection. I thought I was going to faint. What's going on? And we've had to explain that that's what it is. An obvious example, again, would be an allergic response. And that can be to the carrier, the water, the oil, to the form of alcohol that's been added to either the water or the oil, depending on the product you're using. Normally oil, of course. Um, and if the ratio is ever so slightly off, you get what we call post-injection pain. And again, and this is a very small percentage of users, that applies to test flu itself, of course, certain carriers, again the oil, again the alcohol, where the person in questions had an allergic response. So, for example, and I think actually the person that did this article wrote something about this, and they referred to a study. And I actually said the study was fucking shit. But I couldn't understand why the researchers had used a form of peanut oil to test an idea based around the idea of users using steroids. And I'm like, try to explain to me in simple terms why arguably one of the most allergic response causing oils was used by scientists in a fucking study about getting users to use steroids and to see their response to steroids. It made no sense to me whatsoever. There are arguably, and I'm just going to do this off the top of my head, Steve, so listeners can quite actually argue with this point if they wish. But there's 4 or 5 oils. Grapeseed oil seems to be the favorite. I believe cottonseed oil has been another one, and so on and so forth, which are used as the carrier for the testosterone, as the carrier for the steroid when you're using injectable. Again, small percentages of users may be allergic to the oil. The peanut oil example I gave you would be absolutely fucking lethal. People can't take the smell of peanuts or peanut oil that's been added to certain spicy foods in restaurants Can you imagine injecting it and freaking the fuck out and getting some sort of illness or arguably even death from not knowing that there was a peanut oil being used as a carrier? It's just fucking crazy. So again, one example which was mentioned in this article, of course, is that they talked about the acidic residues. So when the raw material, the testosterone powder, all forms, is created, some of those powders are super clean, Steve, when they are made. They're 99.9%. Then over time, either the manufacturing process drops off a little bit or the manufacturer just isn't on point full stop. It will contain a very small percentage, typically moisture from the air. This is all dry powders, especially with the higher percentages I just mentioned. But also, again, it might be super sterile coming out of the machine when it's made, and then there might be some part of the process when it's packaged, when uh, 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 bacteria gets in, virus gets in, whatever, and that gets to you. And again, it's a very small percentage. It could be micrograms, nanograms, whatever, really, really, really small amounts, but it'd be not just enough. In the alcohol that's added should actually help with the sterility, but what if it doesn't? So then you might have a very small amount of something in the raw material or in the oil or even in the alcohol itself, which is resistant, and the user, i.e. us, responds to that. Finally, and this is a point that was made again in the article, when we have any of these kind of conversations, whether it's the allergic response, whether it's an actual bacteria or a virus, whether it's the way that the product was manufactured, and this is before we get to actual flu-like symptoms, you're assuming, because we have zero option otherwise, it's very difficult to get the back and forth otherwise, that all the parameters, all the metrics are the same, that the user age is the same. One would assume that a younger user would have a better response to certain things than an older user, but that's not always the case. That the health of the user, what if you already have an underlying bacterial or some sort of viral infection? Is your diet poor? Are you overtraining like a maniac? Are you around people with flu-like viruses and you're confusing an actual flu or flu-like symptoms from a friend or a member of the family versus the coincidental fact that you've just started injecting a product? And people don't do that. And then lastly, of course, is it actually flu? It's small, silly little things. And sometimes we can take a single argument or a single point of view and kind of expand it into other things. And that's probably because as human beings, we tend to look for a fault, we tend to look for a reason. And sometimes I've used this in some of these COVID and other sort of big arguments and theories and conspiracies and whatever else. And we go, oh, look, guys, sometimes you're just dealing with people that should be intelligent that aren't, and they're in fucking charge, and you might be more intelligent than them, and you're not in charge, and you're kind of relying on them being clever, and you're not clever. And the reality is they're thick as two short planks, or they fucked up because people make mistakes. So the same thing applies here. We can confuse, for example, the fact that we might have already had underlying flu-like symptoms day one, which we hadn't shown. Then we give ourselves an injection of a new form of testosterone, and lo and behold, we get something that feels very much like the flu. Is it the flu or isn't it? And even one more thing to consider, Steve, and this is again for those susceptible or amenable, if you like, to how they feel on testosterone. You and I just recorded a show. And in that show, the person was talking about the dosage and stacking they were using. And I've actually echoed the exact same sentiments that he's done. And I said on TRT, I didn't think it'd make much of a difference, but I noticed it. And I would argue that when I take a cycle, I tend to push myself harder in the gym. So I might need more sleep. But when I'm not pushing as hard in the gym, when I'm only on TRT, I might actually feel healthier. I might actually feel more energetic. I might feel more, and I actually do this, Steve. I'll go off and I'll do more painting and decorating and things around the house. So arguably, how we sometimes are, how we specifically feel. There are examples, Steve, of users whose susceptibility to how they respond to testosterone is incredibly high. How many times have I used the phrase when we've been talking about TRT, when I said for some people, and they would be at the lower end of the normal or below the normal end of normal ranges for an adult male, You give them 100 milligrams or 150 milligrams or even 200 milligrams per week of testosterone. And in a very small few, they feel fucking amazing. I'm out there shagging. I got a promotion at work. I've just sold the most cars at the dealership. I'm kicking ass left, right, and center. I nearly got into a fight in the bar the other night. That's not like me. I feel like I fucking God. And it's because of how they respond. So the same thing can apply when it comes to flu-like symptoms using certain forms of testosterone. They actually kind of mistake being super driven, super high on testosterone for being ill because it actually makes them feel uncomfortable. It takes a while to get used to. And that in and of itself. Let me give you one more example. This is how the human brain works. I was able to do this as a kid. I don't know about you, Steve. When we were children, we didn't want to go to school for the day. Oh, my belly aches. And after a while, your belly does kind of start to ache. And you do feel kind of sweaty. Mummy comes over and she puts her hand on your forehead. So the placebo effect, us actually wanting to take time off school, being a little bit anxious, and we kind of start to think that it's a job interview. No one's going to die, but we get nervous. No one's going to die because we've injected testosterone, but we kind of feel weird because we just given, and this especially applies to the higher dosages, a high dose of testosterone. And so literally how some people will respond. I've known gym buddies when we've been talking about stacks and cycles or whatever else who do amazingly well on 200 or 300 milligrams a week. But if they take it up to 500, 600, 800, if anything happens at work or whatever else, oh, I don't feel right, Steve, I'm going to drop the dose. And we've seen this again on the forums, and it's not flu, it's not testosterone like flu, although we will address when it might occur. It's literally sometimes them just not being comfortable. To use another analogy, and we've used this one before, it's the idea of putting a bigger engine in a small car. It's going to take a little bit of while to get used to. It might not actually be good for the rest of the car, the gears, the brakes, the suspension, the way the car handles. And sometimes when we give ourselves, especially high dosage of testosterone, we need to either adapt to how that feels or we need to back it the fuck off because it just doesn't suit us. What's your suggestions before we get into what might actually be causing real test like flu?
Well, let me kind of talk about both a little bit. And a lot of what you said is very, very solid information. And look, at the end of the day, I can simplify everything to this, and that the body is an amazing thing. And sometimes the body has a reaction, pure and simple. Even it could happen one time on your entire cycle. It could happen 5 times. It could happen 10 times. It could happen once every year, once every 5 years. The
Yep.
body can recognize a foreign entity and freak out. So our immune
Yep.
system starts spitting out inflammation or rises, and the temperature of our body goes up to fight it off because it thinks it's an attack. I'll give you another example. Let's say a wasp. I don't know if you have those in the UK, Mobster. Do you have wasps?
Yeah. Wasp. Yeah.
Yeah, you have
Singing
those.
stinks. Worse than bees killing little shits.
So what happens? Let's say you're walking up to your door and you go to, open your door and a wasp nest is right next to your door and the wasp comes and boom and stings you. And
Yeah.
then nothing happens to you. And you're like, "Oh shit, that fucking hurt like hell." It stings you right on the arm. So then the next day, same thing. You come home from work, you go to open the door, and boom, the wasp comes and stings you. But this time, you go into anaphylactic shock. You're like, oh
Yeah.
my God, my throat's closing up. And then you're like, oh my God, what do I do here? I got to go to the fucking emergency room to get an a shot, because of my allergies. So what happened there? How come yesterday you got a wasp stung you and nothing
Mm,
happened. It just
mm.
burned a little bit and you were fine. But the next day, the wasp stings you and you go into anaphylactic shock. Your throat closes up. You got to go to the emergency room and get a shot. And to
An EpiPen shot.
yeah,
Yeah,
you have to
yeah,
get the EpiPen, right? What happened there? Because your body is an amazing thing. Your body changes. One day your body decided not to have a reaction to that wasp sting. Even though it's just a fucking wasp sting, it ain't gonna fucking hurt you. It's just a fucking wasp that stuck its little thing in you. Ooh, poor baby. It stuck its little thing in you. But the next day, your body decided, you know what? We're under attack. We need to fucking fight this shit. All hands
mm,
on
mm,
deck.
mm,
Let's
mm.
fucking bomb this shit out of this thing. It's attacking us. So your body changes, your body has reactions. So in the end, it's not that the testosterone that you're injecting is harmful. It's not that the compounds or the oils in the testosterone is harmful. It's that your body thinks at that particular time and in that particular time of
Yeah.
day that it is harmful. So we see this a lot with people. This is why I laugh when people say, "Oh, I'm allergic to bees. I get that bee away from me." I say, "How do you know you're allergic to bee?" "Oh, because when I was a kid, I got stung by one and I had a really bad reaction." I was like, "That doesn't mean you're allergic to them. Just because when you were a kid, a bee happened to sting you and something went wrong doesn't mean now as an adult the bee could sting you, anything could happen to you, because your body changes all the time. Your allergies change all the time. Food allergies can change all the time. I'll give you an example. Almonds. If I
Yeah.
eat
You got that,
almonds
Steve. Yeah.
over and over and over, day in and day out, day in and day out, I eat almonds, which is a great fucking bodybuilder food, by the way.
Yeah.
And if I eat almonds day in and day out, day in and day out, I'll develop an allergy to them. If I eat them, I'll start sneezing. I'll start sneezing. But if I eat it for maybe a couple weeks, then I don't eat it for like a month, then I reintroduce it back into my diet. This
Mm,
is why I
mm,
cycle nuts. Then
yeah.
my body's fine. It's not that the almond is bad for me. It's not that the almond is harmful. Is that my body over time, when I'm eating it day in and day out, ends up having a reaction. So it's the same thing here. So it doesn't mean that the testosterone is necessarily bad for you. It's just that your body thinks that
Yes.
it has to fight it off and it has to go all hands on deck. So it's the same way you brought up the COVID. When people were getting the COVID vaccines, I got several. Mobster, I know you
Yeah.
got several.
Yeah. Fear
And
and that stuff.
I got the flu shot like a month
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
So what happens after I got my flu shot a couple months ago? I felt tired for like 2 days. I felt tired.
Yes. Me and
It's
all.
not
Yeah. One
that,
time. Yeah.
it's because your body is reacting to the vaccine
Yes.
and it's
Yes.
building a tolerance
Resistance. Yes.
to the virus. So you're
Mm.
supposed to feel a little bit. You could feel a little bit. You could feel a little numb, a little soreness from the injection. It's the same thing. So your body always is changing and always is reacting to what you put inside of
You
it.
just reminded me two things, Steve. I've actually mentioned on shows that I can no longer have a dark or milk chocolate, which I could absolutely smash the granny out of when I was a kid. And one more thing, which actually relates to what we're talking about here. I remember replying on Evolutionary when I first came onto the forum, before I was even a moderator. And someone talked about an allergy, help us, to testosterone. And I thought, what a crock of shit, that can't be right. Went on to Google, did a little bit of searching, and I was thinking, how the fuck can you be allergic to a hormone that actually occurs naturally in the body? Men and women have naturally occurring different ratios, as we know, naturally occurring levels of testosterone in the body. How can you be allergic to it? And I'm not talking about injectable testosterone
Yeah.
or oral testosterone. It was literally if it went out of range or the wrong ratios in their body, men or women, they would have an allergic like response. And I was like, I've never heard of this before. Went away, checked, found it was actually true. So there are literally, as Steve just said, your body responding to something that naturally occurs in your body. And then literally testosterone, not any of the other things we've covered, just the testosterone itself that occurs all fucking ready. If it's slightly off or a little bit too high, maybe because they've had an operation or they've got an illness, anything like that, boom, it goes out of ratio, out of range, and that particular person has allergic type response to the testosterone ratio, to the testosterone level that naturally occurs in their body. I was like, what the fuck? But it was a legitimate medical condition. So even that, imagine if you are, as I said earlier on, then injecting that kind of ratio, that kind of higher level. For example, we know, and there are different ways of measuring this, that the low end is around, I believe, Steve, 300 nanograms a deciliter, and the high end, and this is naturally occurring, 900 nanograms a deciliter. Now, in the 900, which is very rare, you're really looking at high end natural athletes. And I'm going to assume that they're all natural. Who knows? But we're talking about your sprinters, your athletic type athletes that compete in the Olympics, etc., with zero drugs. And again, that percentage that was that high was very hot, very small. And at the low end, although it is becoming more common, Below 300 nanograms a deciliter is when you might see other type symptoms, etc. In the middle, i.e. 450, 500, that's when you're ticking over, you feel healthy, you feel good. But you can take a low end use number, like I said before, or less than 300, give them the equivalent, say 500 or 600, it will transform or make them feel ill. Equally, if someone was at the high end and we took them by some means, medication or illness, down to the low end, they'd probably feel like fucking beaten up dog shit and tired and old and joints like da-da-da-da. Or we double it, we go from 900 to 1800. Not every person that takes super high levels or has medical ailments or has whatever. And again, we have to make sure we don't sometimes have the time, the
Yeah.
wherewithal, the medical information from the person who's asking the question to be sure that this is the reason why they're having this particular problem. So yeah, look, guys, it's one of those. Yes, by all means, ask, was we want to make sure that you're good to go. We don't want you getting ill on cycle. We don't want you to have an allergic response. We don't want you to have other stuff that's not being diagnosed or treated or whatever. Let me give you one more example just on that topic, Steve. Recall the late Paul Borison having an athlete approach him, and this athlete was a high-end competitor, amateur, who hadn't had any progress, regardless of the stack, regardless of the cycle, regardless of the training, for 1 or 2 years. And they went and they had him go to see the fella who I shall name, called Dr. Dave Parry, and they gave him a fantastic, really in-depth medical examination, bloods, lipids, you name it, the whole thing. Pissing this bottle, bleeding, taking blood samples, swabbing the mouth, the whole goddamn thing, every single thing. And they found that he had a long acting, undiagnosed gut infection, which they were able to treat with super fucking powerful antibiotics. And within a few months of this big treatment and the analysis, he's suddenly able to put on weight. Again, we assume when we run cycles, when we're using testosterone, that we've got no problems, nothing else is going on, etc. So there's so many different parameters. We can only address via this show one or two, which might be the more common, obvious reason versus some of the other parameters which are difficult to analyze because there are so many and the people and the individuals on the self are so diverse. So we need to be careful. We'll get into that in a moment. Any more thoughts, Steve?
Yeah, and let me talk about some ways we can combat a little bit. And look, the truth is, you've got to use high quality testosterone. That's going to give you the
Yes.
best way.
Yes.
So try a different brand. If this keeps happening to you, try a different brand like Belagas, because Belagas is as close to pharmacy grade and high quality as you're going to find. And you're going to notice when you use the Belagas testosterone, we're going to get it, and Mobster is going to kind of go over the Belagas testosterone options here in a second. And they do have every
Yeah.
type of option you could possibly dream of.
So many, Steve.
Yeah.
Wow.
But you're going to notice when you inject Belagas, it's smoother. It's going to have less side effects. It's going to have less PIP, post-injection pain. It's going to have all that because they designed it for that purpose. So they designed it so that you can run more than just what our body naturally produces. Twice as much, three times as much, five times as much, 10 times as much, 15 as much. A lot of people run Balaga skier, 1,000 milligrams a week, 1,500 milligrams a week. We're gonna go over dosages later in the show, but you can run a lot more Balagas than your body can normally produce, and you won't have as many issues as you would with other gear. Now, if you're gonna go buy gear, like in your day, Monster, from the guy behind the gym, the meathead
Yeah.
behind the
Yeah.
gym, in the truck or the van, right? And then you're gonna inject that, and you're gonna have problems. You're gonna end up in the emergency room. Then that's on you, because in today's society, we have options. Consumers demand options, and one of the options we
Yes.
have is using high quality gear such as Belagas. So. Any suggestions before you can go over the list of testosterone options from Belagas?
One of the things I would normally say at the end of the show, talking about Beligas, we've got some great approved sources and we know how products are manufactured. We're aware, you and I, of the quality issues back in the past. And as Steve just said, just to touch on that particular point, Beligas is legitimately a actual pharmaceutical company in Belgium. And for example, just on this particular issue right here, Steve, they will have samples of products taken by federal inspectors in Belgium or European or the EU or whoever, or even the local Belgian form of trading standards, Steve, and their product will be taken away and tested for quality, for clarity, for lack of bacterial issues, etc., etc. Now, we have some fantastic approved sources to do a lot of testing, etc., but they are not federally inspected by local government officials. Beligas will be. Let's be fucking clear on that. Let me run through, Steve, and I don't want to do this too quick, but equally it will take quite a while. And I didn't actually get to the end of the list, guys. I think there was another page just in front of me. They do a test trend Bolderon blend, 400 milligrams. A test Deca product, again, a blend, 500 milligrams. Test EQ, 400 milligrams. Test NPP, 150 milligrams. EFO test, which would be a test in amphate, 300 milligrams. Super test, 400. Test suspension, 100. That's halfway through the very quick list I've got here. Test trend long, which is 300 milligrams. Test trend, I think this is a short version. I didn't make that note, 150. Proper, what they call proper, which is a testosterone propionate, 100. Super test, 500. Another form of testing amphate, EFO test, 450, which differs from the 300. SIPO test, so a cypionate, 250. A SIPO test, again a cypionate, 200. And a super test, 250. And I think there was a page and a half to go, but with the show started, I was just running out of time. So there was another, I think, 3 or 4 products I could have added to that list. That is arguably, Steve, quite by far, from one single company, the most comprehensive list of both blends and singular forms of testosterone that I've seen from any company. And you and I do plenty of approved shows, great sources, etc. But I've never had to list for one show was nearly 20 products, Steve. If I'd have done the full list, it would have been 20 forms of testosterone or testosterone blends from one company, different amounts. And that was the single list, meaning it was either domestic or the US. It wasn't the combination of both, which would double down. But yeah, 20 forms of testosterone just for Beligas. Even that, Steve, can you imagine? For example, the very first one I listed, the test trend Bolderon 400, you might be responding to the trend because we know that trend can be inflammatory in the body. So you might have flu-like symptoms because you don't respond to trend very well. So again, this just as an example and a piece of advice right here. Although I'm not necessarily keen on trying every steroid just to see how I get on with every steroid, it might be one of the few times where I say try a straightforward form of testosterone, for example, Tesnoesta, or a short-acting form of testosterone, just to see how you get on before you use a longer-acting. And don't use it as part of a blend. Use it as a single form product. Very simple, straightforward stack and cycle. And again, that might just be to see how you respond to a single type product before you go, oh, I'm good with this. Can I use a blend? Because a blend will actually suit me better, and so on and so forth. So, yes, Steve, look, where do we go with this? I think you and I, as you said in the pre-show, we need to come at it from how we would run a cutter, a bulker, a strengther, a recomposition, because otherwise we've got too many options here. I mean, that's fantastic from Beligas. They really do have you covered, but we need to kind of focus. Otherwise, this will be a 2 or 3 hour show if we covered everything.
Let's talk about how to run testosterone solo first, and then we're going to get into how to stack testosterone based on your goals, whether you want to bulk, cut, recomp, or strength. So let's start with effectively running testosterone solo. So let me start with this mobster. In the TRT dosage, a lot of people, they'll use Beligas and they'll do self TRT. It's way cheaper than going through a doctor, way cheaper than
Yep.
going to the anti-aging clinic, dealing with the bullshit of an anti-aging clinic. And you can do anywhere from 100 and up of testosterone per week. I would suggest doing their test SIP because that would mean you only have to inject once a week. And that would be a great way to do TRT. Now, how much TRT should you use? Everybody's going to be different. I always suggest going from 100 to 120 milligrams a week. Now, some people do more. Some people do sports TRT. which is more like 200, 250 milligrams a week. And some people do bodybuilder TRT, which is 300 to 500 milligrams a week. So in the end, you've got to make that decision on how much you choose to use. Keep in mind, the more you use, the more negative effects it's going to have on you over the long term. The more prone you're going to be to issues in the long term. The more thick your blood is going to get. So that comes with issues. So I will suggest with TRT 100 to 120 milligrams a week. That is the proper dose to replace what your body should normally produce. So, Monster, what are some what's your thoughts on that? And tell us some
Yeah,
effective testosterone only cycles that people can do.
yeah. I mean, the obvious thing, just to respond to what Steve just said, I run a testosterone supinator, 200 milligrams a week, and I've been doing that now, coming up on 19, 20 months. Might be a little bit less. I think it was just before I was age 59, and I'm 61 as we do this show right now. I'll be 62 in August, so 6 or 7 months' time. So about 18 months, 18 months. And yeah, didn't think, as I said earlier on, didn't think it'd make much of a difference. Did, in terms of my sense of well-being, which improved a little bit. Didn't think it'd make much of a difference to my sex drive. Did, just by virtue of taking matters in hand for myself. The frequency, etc., etc. Not crazy, not super duper or anything else, but enough for me to notice. So yeah, absolutely on point. In terms of solo, Steve, again, I've done the recommendation. If you've never used it and you're not sure how you can respond, you can. This applies to all kinds of steroids, of course. Use a much shorter or no ester version if you can, just to see how you respond, and especially if you might have an allergic reaction. But for the most part, as an example, the simplest solo cycle that has been recommended for years, which is a little bit of bro science in terms of the number, but we'll throw it out there. We put it out for people to listen to, and that is the classic 300 to 500 milligrams of an enanthate, 1 or 2 jabs a week. Typically, with an enanthate, you could probably pin once a week, but most people pin twice a week. That means Monday and Thursday, similar to what I do when I'm on a bulk. And that's very straightforward. And you can almost that and maybe having an AI on hand, and you don't need to run anything else. And arguably, this whole testosterone, all cycles need to testosterone based, which is a bit of bollocks. Here, arguably, you're only using testosterone. And an enormous amount of users have had great success with very simple, very straightforward. It doesn't need to be 500 milligrams. It can just be more than instead with the TRT dose, for example. So, but 500 milligrams is probably the place that most people start from. But a way to actually do that sensibly, Steve, would be start lower. You can't take product out if it's already in, especially if it's a longer acting product like enanthate or cypionate, as we were talking about earlier. But you can obviously, you can go higher. It's a lot easier. Shorter acting versions you can tweak a lot quicker, etc., etc. So, what do you think about that one before we talk about anything else?
Yeah, and I just want to say with your situation, Mobster, definitely at 200 milligrams a week, you definitely want to be working with a cardiologist and make sure that your hematocrit and your red blood cell counts and the thickness of your blood isn't too much, because that can lead to blood clots and strokes. So definitely keep an eye on that and be donating blood constantly if you do choose to do a higher TRT dosage. Now let's talk about how to stack testosterone. And there's no right or wrong way to do this. I mean, we would love to hear from you guys on what are your favorite stacks with testosterone. But I want to start with you, Mobster. Why don't you touch upon maybe one or two great bulking stacks with testosterone that you have experience with, and then talk about maybe one or two great strength stacks, and specifically give us the ones that you bulked up to the biggest you've ever been, and the one that you got stronger than you've ever been, and how
I'll
much
give you a
testosterone you
second.
have.
I'll give you a second example, which differs slightly, not from my experience, but I'll say the why in a minute, right? So my favourite, as Steve knows, and as regular listeners will know, is arguably sustanon, because we know that sustanon is a combination of different testosterone extras, short, medium, and long acting, combined with DECA. And actually, one of the products I listed earlier on is testosterone and NPP, which is the faster acting version of DECA. So we know, and my dosage is for that, and you don't have to run what I run. You could run it a little bit less. So I'm going to give you a range, and you could swap the sustanon that I use for a straight form of testosterone, again, probably an amphate here, and run it with the DECA. And if you respond well to testosterone, I respond very well typically to the sustanon, you should blow the fuck up. And of course, it's diet and training combined as well, of course. And again, at the low end, the two of them combined would be around 600 milligrams. But most people, myself included, are going to push the two of them together up to around 800, 850 milligrams, which is the sweet spot for me. I've gone over a gram. I've gone as high as 1.6. That didn't work for me. We know that people are out there doing crazy numbers. Now, let me give you an example. And I've actually talked about this on other shows. I said I would buy with my buddies in the gym that we had in Gloucester. We would all buy our products together all at once, get a big order, put it in, and it would be split between four of us. That's how we did it back in the day. My buddies loved Enamphate, loved it. For them, that was a foundation of their strength cycles. They were all doing amateur, intermediate, and one or two the higher end professional strongman. I was doing my grip competitions, and I ran a couple of cycles with Enamphate as the base, if you like, of the cycle. And I wasn't raging, I wasn't raving, I wasn't saying that this was amazing, but my buddies absolutely fucking loved it. They weren't using crazy dosages. Again, just on the Enamphate, Steve, with other products, they were using, I think, 400 to 600 milligrams a week. And then if I was them, and I can't remember specifically what they were doing, I would have probably combined that because I love it, the oral anavar, which of course Beligas does as well. And for me, that would be an absolute guarantee. Now, some of those athletes had to compete in weight limited competitions. I think 105 was normal with a couple of 90 kilo. 105 is 231 pounds and 90 kilos 198 pounds. So they couldn't get too big, but they absolutely wanted to peak their strength there. So they absolutely fucking loved it. For whatever reason, and I'm quite prepared to use it as a TRT, for whatever reason, I just didn't get that little kick or notice the kick or notice an increase in size from Enamphate that my buddies absolutely did. So it may well be that I was the odd man out and all of those were more likely to be normal responders to it. So that's just an example of how you can respond. And again, we talked about test flu here, how you can respond differently to the same product that the buddies had or someone else is using almost the same dosage and get completely different effects. And of course, which is always going to be true, it is dependent upon your training. It is dependent on your diet. So we can inject the exact same amount of product from the same company, from Beligas, and still not quite well be there. Pure strength, Steve. Do you know, in these days, and if I was talking to my buddies now, I'd go higher. They were talking, as I said, 400 to 600 milligrams. I would probably have them, especially if they've been training for a little while, push the number. Don't need to go up to grams and grams and grams, but I would, for example, have them get closer to 1,000 milligrams, especially if they're not worried too much about increasing their body weight. Definitely have them be on point with their proteins and their food intakes and nutrients, etc. And I'd probably have them do, for example, the bowl at the beginning, halo testing around the last week or two prior to the competition to hit the big numbers, check drops on the day. And again, this is just to get them to go out and be absolute fucking monsters. But it's dose dependent. Now, there would be plenty of people listening to this show that can go online and find, oh, you should be doing 2 grams, monster. What you're fucking talking about, you should be using 3 grams. That's what all the pros are doing. I've been around some of the world's strongest men, and I mean literal British, national, European, and even up to and including world's strongest man strength. And some of them are, yes, doing absolutely crazy amounts, but the great and vast majority are not. They are, arguably, Steve, very, very good responders to what we might call sensible, maybe pushing the envelope. So where are we going up to realistically? And I'm talking about people that weigh 330, 360 pounds or more, some of them 400 pounds, Steve. Probably no more than 2,000 milligrams a week. There's probably more growth hormone in there for tissue repair and peptides in there than there used to be. But the testosterones, etc., probably run low, but consistently through the year because there's a lot of competitions, but then pushed high prior to competitions and around competitions. So, for example, if I was a professional athlete competing as many as 12 times a year for about, I think it's about 6 to 8 months, the rest of the season they have off, I would probably be doing 600 to 800 milligrams a week all the fucking time because it's actually kind of affordable. I would definitely be getting my bloods done. And then around the time of a competition, and especially if I respond well to testosterone, combining it with growth hormone and peptides for health and recovery, I would probably push it just for brief periods of time, 4 weeks maybe, and certainly around the competitions, up as high as 1,500, 2,000. I have heard of powerlifters back in the day experimenting, but that's what was happening. Some were going crazy, some were not. Some were doing incredibly well, some were not. Some were having actual, literal issues and side effects which they didn't like. And that's how we learned to run them safely, run them at sensible levels. The main thing here, guys, is you're not a turbo car. You can't go foot flat to the floor. So keep that in mind. What about recomposition or cutting here, Steve? What would
Yeah,
you
let
do?
me go over a cutting stack. And look, popular way to include testosterone in a cut would be using test prop at a lower dosage, something like 200, 300 milligrams a week. Now, some of you out there are going to react well to the Beligas testosterone. You'll be able to run it higher. Some of you don't. You'll get a lot of water retention, which runs counterproductive to cutting. So you want to run it a little lower. It just depends. Everybody's a little different. You'll figure it out and you'll be able to adjust. The nice thing about the test prop mobster is that you can be flexible with it. So let's say you start out with 300 milligrams and you're like, you know what, I'm retaining a lot of water here and this is boosting my appetite too much. Let me lower it. Now, if you lower it to 200, it will take effect much quicker than if you were taking a longer ester. So this is why the short ester theory on this makes a lot of sense for you. Now you can add some Balagas Anavar, 50 milligrams a day for 6 to 8 weeks. That would be a great cutting stack. Add in some fasted cardio and a strong and tight diet, and you will be amazed at how much you're able to cut on that. Anavar, the Balagas Anavar is very, very good quality, and it will help you cut fat. It's been shown that it can actually help with that stubborn stomach fat that men tend to have around their bellies. Now, recomposition. When it comes to recomping, you could throw in some testosterone with Balagas Equipoise at 300 milligrams a week. You can also add in an oral like Balagas Proviron or Balagas Tebol at 25 to 50 milligrams a day. And again, the same rules apply. The fasted cardio, strong and tight diet. You want to make sure that you're not putting junk in your body, and you'll be shocked at how much benefits you can get. But Balagas has everything. They have a good Primobolan, which is also good for cutting and recomping. They have a good Winstrol, which is absolutely amazing for recomping and cutting as well. So they have a Masteron, which is also amazing for this purpose. So let's go over them. Winstrol, 25 to 50 milligrams a day, perfectly good. They have you cover that if you want to take the tablet, if you want to drink it, or if you want to inject it. They have the different Winstrol options that you can take advantage of. Primobolan, if you want to use Primobolan, you can go a little strong with it, anywhere from 300 or 400 milligrams a week up to 5, 6, 700 milligrams a week. Arnold loved Primo back in the day. He would run 100
Yeah.
milligrams a day of the AMP Primo, and man, that shit hurt like hell, but he would do it. Talk about post injection pain. That gave you some nasty post injection pain, but he had to do it. That's what worked back then. That's what they had access to. Balagas, they make their primo, especially for bodybuilders, especially to jack up the dose. Okay.
Yeah.
So for them, they are going to make it very user friendly. So you'll be able to jack up the dose of primo. You won't have to be in pain after injecting it. So it's a really, really good option. And then the Masteron, similar dosing. If you're new to it and then you don't need much, maybe 200-300 milligrams a week would be perfectly fine. If you're more experienced, a lot of people like to jack up the dose. You see a lot of pro bodybuilders who will jack up the Masteron dose to 600, 800, 1,000, 1,200 milligrams a week. And that will do them wonders. Monstro, I believe, Mobster, he used to run Masteron at a really crazy dose. I think he was going to
Yeah.
1,500 on the
Yeah.
Masteron because it hardens you up and it cuts you and it makes you vascular like nothing else.
Which he was 100%. Listen, I'm looking at four products, in fact, that I mentioned earlier on, Steve, that both would work for us. The two that I'm going to first suggest will probably be perfect for a cut, although you could use them for recomp. And the last two are much better at cutting and or recomposition. It's a bit confusing, but I'll explain. So I'm looking at their Test EQ 400. So that would be a great cut in my mind, Steve, using testosterone. And I would probably run that at 3 injections a week, which would give me half a mil at a time, actually, for me. So you'd only be looking at 600 milligrams. That would probably work for me better. But again, other users might push that up a little bit to 3/4 or up as high as 3 mil. 3 mil would take you to 1,200 milligrams a week total. They do a test trend Boulderon product, as we talked about before, 400 milligrams again. I'd probably run that in a similar way. And without looking, I'm going to say does feel to me like one of the cutting products I've read and or used myself. So I suspect these are going to be the short restless, and I should have checked. You've also got a test trend long and a test trend short or light, meaning a longer active version and a shorter active version. And they're dosed differently. This test trend long is 300 milligrams and the test trend light is 150 milligrams. Now, I've used very similar products again, mentioned in the tester trend and the Boulder one earlier on, and had absolutely great responses and recomp like a motherfucker. In fact, I was actually trying to cut, but recomp. So, obviously I responded incredibly well to those particular products. And again, it's the option of, was the long is a good example here, Steve. I used a short acting product and got amazing results. And it actually worked for me because I was going to go straight to a bulk for different reasons, mostly about trying out products for brands, etc., and seeing how I responded. And I responded incredibly well. But if, for example, I'd only be doing the recomposition or only be doing the cut and hadn't got into the bulk, the long version for me would have been absolutely perfect because I would have still had my system for a week or so, or even 2 weeks or longer after the initial 4 weeks, which is all that I did, and would still be getting a response, still be recomping, still be cutting. So that makes great things for me. And again, something that Steve just said, and the test trend light is again short in, quicker acting, quicker out. It's a lower dose, Steve, but again, I did exactly what I've talked about before, which was 3 injections a week, which is not normally what I would do, and that come out around the 450, 500 milligram mark over the week. One thing that Steve did say, and it occurred to me as you were talking, Steve, is having products that are specifically designed for bodybuilders. And I mentioned how they're a licensed, federally inspected, etc., company. But let's be honest, none of the products that we've listed, with possibly the exception of the excipient in the enanthate, as they are, would be used for treating medical conditions that exist. A, because there are other medications you can take, and B, because the blends or things like this, the Sustanon that I mentioned earlier on, etc., probably work better. So I would say 99% of their product line is 100% aimed at bodybuilders. And this is something that I've touched upon, and I'll expand upon at the end of the show. And that is that Beligas have listened to their customers and created products for those customers, for what they were. Listen, we've done straightforward test solo cycles. Why do blends exist? Because at some point, you run these products, you're not getting test flu like we covered at the beginning of the show. You know how you respond to testosterone. You know how you respond to trend. You know how you respond to DECA or Sustanon or whatever else. And you start to put together cycles for yourself that make sense based on your aims. And this is key. This is why we're giving you these different examples, because not every person wants to cut or recomp or bulk or get strong. We all have different aims. We come in different conditions to the table. But after a while, you know what works for you. And what they've done here, Steve, is they've gone away and said, what sells? Why are people buying this combination of products? Can we combine those products together? And that's what they've done. And then even better, Steve, is they're doing this with products at the same dosages, there or thereabouts, that they know that the end user is going to use. So, for example, and I'm looking at the screen as I say this, testosterone Trenbolone long blend 300. Bit of a mouthful, guys, but there it is. I'm looking at it. Pink and white labels, etc., etc. It will have a combination. I shall click on it as we're talking, Steve, just to see if I can see on the bottle what it says. There we go. Contains testosterone enanthate at 200 milligrams and Trenbolone enanthate at 100 milligrams. Every single Trenbolone cycle that Steve and I have ever done has always had the trend a little bit less. Doesn't have to be crazy, although we know some users who go crazy. Steve mentioned Monstro, big fan of it again before he passed away. And we know that some users were running 1,000 milligrams, 800 milligrams of Tren a week on top of whatever the fuck else they were doing. But it makes sense here, like Beligas have done for you, to have the enanthate at the higher ratio. So 2-to-1 ratio of enanthate to Trenbolone enanthate. And that means, of course, for example, I'm just looking at this, it's a long, so as we said, it's an enanthate means a longer ester version. What would I do with this, Steve? I would run probably 2 to 3 mil of this a week. That would push me up into 600 milligrams of testosterone enanthate over the week and 300 milligrams. I'd probably keep it around a 2 mil. So, and again, not a high dosage type product, but it means I've only got two small injections a week, totaling 400 milligrams of enanthate and 200 milligrams of the tren. And even with me, this is double my cypionate TRT. I think I'd get a good response from this. I would definitely harden up. I would definitely get more leaner. And arguably with a trenbolone enanthate, although my preference would be for a shorter ester, I suspect the overall sort of trend type effects, etc., would last a little bit longer. So I'd probably run this for a short period of time, 4 to 6 weeks, rather than some users 8 to 10 weeks. How would you run something like this test trenbolone blend if you were doing it, Steve?
Yeah, first of all, you want to be experienced, first of all, if you're going to use Trend, obviously, because you don't want to be messing around with Trend if you don't have experience. So I wouldn't run them in a blend. I would run them separately. And then once you do that and get that under your belt, then you can run it in a blend, absolutely. So you want to get somewhere a mobster, somewhere around, 300, 400 milligrams a week maximum. I've never using trend, I've always gotten just as good results on
Yeah,
less of trend, like 250 or 300 than I have on
so
350 or
effective,
500,
Steve. Yeah,
400.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's just so powerful, and it's almost like it goes against you to get more strong. So that's definitely how I would do it there. But again, it's one of those things where you've got to kind of try it out and see what the dosing is. So come on the forum, start a log, try out the dosing, check out the other logs as well, see what guys are running these compounds at. We've seen a trend, Monster. We've seen a trend. And even you as a boomer have to admit this. People are running less amount of gear now than they were 5 or 10 years ago. People are realizing, hey, running more is counterproductive. They've seen people die. You mentioned Monstro earlier. They've seen
Yes,
people get very sick, needing
yes,
dialysis. They've seen people
yeah,
getting blood clots and strokes. They say,
yeah.
you know what? I don't need, why run that much when I get just as good of results without the health ramifications? So, in my opinion, I think it makes a lot of sense for people to run less to start and then see how you react to it and go on. And again, with Belagas, and we're going to transition now to talking about Belagas specifically. The nice thing about Belagas, like we could sit here and tell you, yeah, run a shit ton of gear, buy all this gear up and run it. We don't have any skin in the game to
Yeah,
push gear
we're
on
not getting
you.
a percentage of their sales,
No.
are we,
So
Steve?
for
Yeah,
us, I'm just gonna be honest with you. Belagas, their gear is so fucking good that you can run less of it and get
yeah.
just as good of results on that normal, you know, gear that you're buying from that dude in the, in the truck behind the gym.
Steve, just to echo what you're saying very quickly, and without going into specifics, we literally just did a show an hour before this one, two today, and that person said the product quality of the products he was using has improved so much that he actually thinks either A, the quality previously was shit or underdosed. And because he's getting quality products, he feels that it's a better response to it. And that's exactly what you're looking at here. Again, this is a license, federally approved. They can have people come to the gate in a car, show their fucking badges, and drive onto the premises and take product from the lab, take samples of the raw material, whatever the fuck else. And when you are doing that, it's the same as any big pharmaceutical company because that's who they are. When you're doing that, you will get fined. I'm not sure what fucking Belgium. Let's say it's a Belgian mark. You will be fined hundreds of thousands, might be euro coin, whatever the fuck it is. You will be fined hundreds of thousands, equivalent dollars or equivalent pounds sterling, because your products are underdosed or because they're contaminated. And I don't. This is not some grey lab up in the fucking mountains, north, north or south of the Mexican border, or wherever else. It is literally there'll be signs outside saying who they are, what they do, and if people turn up with the local government logo on the side of the car, and they get out of the car and they drive to the gate and say, "We've got to let us in. We're inspectors," and then they drive on. And then everybody inside rushes around, comes out to greet them and makes them a cup of coffee, and then they get walked around the plant. And at any point of the manufacturing process, take samples from there. What's this? Thank you very much. Sample A, sample B. Right, let's go to your lab. Let's see your testing facilities. Where are you doing the testing for bacterial infections? Let's have a look at that. Can we see the permits that you use to import the raw materials? Are you making your own raw materials? All of that in a way that other companies can't even begin to get close to. I've been involved, Steve. I actually had to do this as a bit of research. I've forgotten what it's called. There was a process similar, but it's actually something with all the supermarkets in the UK. And I think there's also something called the Reg Tractor policy, which works similar. And it's very similar to the ISO 9001, which some companies follow. And also you've got what's called good manufacturing process. And essentially, a company like Beligas must show from the beginning, meaning when the raw materials arrive on site, who they came from with certificates, test them when they arrive, all the way to the end. And that can include going to a pharmacist in Belgium, buying product like we do over the internet and having that product tested for every single part of the process. And they have to keep a folder, I believe, on each batch, Steve, with stamps and signatures done at certain times of the day, night, everything. Now, some companies are really, really good, but Beligas will have to do this by fucking law in a way that would blow the fuck of a grey market, underground lab, etc. kind of company. Even the very, very best won't be to that level. So you have to understand this is what Steve says. If products can vary, we know they do. Certainly in the past, it's been getting better and better and better as we carry on, and especially outside of the smaller companies we've never heard of. The bigger companies don't get to stay around without doing it. But it will mean if they say it's got 100 milligrams of propylene, it will absolutely has to, by fucking law, be within 5%, meaning at least 95 milligrams by fucking law. That's pretty much the standard for pharmaceutical companies worldwide. So they absolutely have to be like that. Steve, I've been involved in food manufacturing, quality control. I work with the quality control people. I've been up into the food labs. I've been to flavoring companies. I've been to companies that manufactured for me protein powders and seen the parts of the process and how things are done. I've worn the hairnet, put the overalls on, wore the overboots, gone upstairs and tasted samples of products when they were manufactured. So I know how that works. And obviously, because you and I talk about steroids, we can talk about certain parts of the process. Guys, you can go online and you can literally watch people making steroids in their fucking kitchen. One was just a kitchen. It didn't even have polythene or anything. And the guy was literally standing next to his stove in some scout up north in this country, cooking up steroids in his kitchen and talking to a fucking video company. Another one, they covered the place in polythene. This is a pharmaceutical. It's a huge, great. You will be able to find pictures online of what the plant looks like. The scales that they weigh the powders on to the milligram are second-hand, used, $20,000. I think a brand new set of scales to weigh the product, especially if you're making small batches of something, just producing a new blend or whatever else, are over $100,000, Steve, just for the fucking scales that need to be used as part of the manufacturing process. And that's without
You
anything
get a
else.
commission from them. Someone
I
left that comment.
wish.
Someone
I
left that
wish.
comment on YouTube. You get a commission from them. You're full of shit.
I just know how this shit works. There are companies, and Beligas unfortunately isn't one of them. But we had a company we talked about on one show before where they actually had videos of different parts of the process. You could absolutely go online
Someone
and
posted
see these scales. Yeah.
someone posted on Twitter that you own Belagas. That's why you're pushing.
Can you imagine? If only I was on commission, Steve. That would be fucking
You
amazing.
should buy me a
I'd
beach
be rich as
house.
fucking minus.
Why don't you buy me
Yeah,
a
I mean,
beach house since you're so
let's talk,
rich?
Steve, quickly. Why would you use Beligas if you was new to the sport and you were coming in and you wanted quality product, you didn't want to worry about test fluid? Why would you use Beligas before we finish?
Yeah, and look, at the end of the day, I'm someone who historically I'm extremely sensitive to post-injection pain. And it was a struggle for me for many, many years. I can remember the first time I injected steroids. Oh my goodness, I injected it into my shoulders, and man, my shoulder hurt for like a week, man. It was horrible. I was so jittery when I was shaking when I did the injection. It was a horrible experience. It hurt so much. And I've always been sensitive to post injection pain. Even testosterone gave me post injection pain. So Balagas is a breath of fresh air. It's very clean. It's very high quality, very well priced. Pricing is excellent. They run promotions and sales to get the price back down. So even if you're going through a tough time right now, where you don't have as much disposable income as you would like. It's still affordable. So they're great, Mobster. Fast shipping, great service, and great products. What else could you ask for, man? They are fantastic.
And as I said, Steve, in many, many shows, in real terms, guys, I'm just looking at a testosterone blend again, as I said this, under $100. And I believe that's US, not international. And this is just as an example of saying this particular point, guys. You are paying in real terms the lowest prices for testosterone on its own, never mind as a blend, than you've ever paid in fucking history to this particular point. There may well come a time when the prices start to creep up. But Steve and I have been doing these shows a long time. We've covered the history. And we know that back in the year 2000, the guys were going over the border to the Mexican pharmacia to buy a vial of testosterone that cost them $120. That would be $220, $230 now. And I've just quoted you a price of 96 as an example of a blend while I was doing this fucking very part of the show. So in real terms, you are paying less than you've ever paid. And if you use a company like Beligas, the quality isn't a Mexican pharmacia. It's not a Mexican underground lab. It's not a Johnny Come Lately. It's not a Thai company that's been raided 3 fucking times. It is a legitimate, government approved, government authorized, federal inspected, etc., 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 pharmaceutical company like no other when we do these shows that can't make the claim. They don't have a choice on quality. They have to do it by law. Other companies choose to be a higher standard. Other companies do that to keep you as customers. Beligas does that, but they also have to do it because the fucking law says so. That's the reason why they are the quality that they are. That's the reason why the products are the standard that we're talking about. Come onto the forum. We will try to link you to that article as well to make sure that you can look at the other reasons why they might be. But I think we covered the general reasons, the real reasons that most people have test flu. Let us know your experiences. Have you had test flu even? Did you have a medical reason? Was there something else at play? Was it an allergic response? Tell us your thoughts, even your theories as to why test flu is because we want to know. Come on, let us know in the comments, on the forums, on YouTube, on Instagram, you name it. Come and tell us, guys. Please note, as always, we are not doctors and opinions are ours. It is our view based on our experience and views on the topic. A podcast for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.